few last minute adjustments, you know what I mean? Always. Let's see if that's about right. I hope so. Give me a little areas to stand here if I need to. Hopefully I'll be able to speak up tonight. There's nobody else here. There's another function going on elsewhere. As I said, I'm in Washington State taking care of family issues. And the house is mine tonight. And so I can talk loud, and hopefully I can. I'm going to back this up just a little bit more. I need to get a little bit more into the picture there, I think. Yeah, let's see if that works, because I've got these ones on the bottom here that are important to see. Everything's important to see. Sorry, like I said, I just have to do this because I don't have any way of pre-checking the pictures. There, I guess that'll have to do it for now. Yeah, let's bring that down just a little bit more. Pardon my need to take care of this. All right. And some of that might be hard to see. Don't let this overwhelm you. And don't feel that it's daunting. Really, this is just really my way of being able to try to hold all of it together. So we'll take this a step at a time, and hopefully it'll be worthwhile to you. Now, why did I decide to do this? As I said on my earlier post on YouTube and on X, we have this problem with using God to do evil things. When you think that you're the chosen of God and you're given commandments, mitzvot in Hebrew, to do things that you wouldn't normally do, but if God says it's okay and you go ahead and do it, does that make it okay? Well, you know, religious people, rabbis, Christian pastors, etc., would say yes. And the reason why they say yes is because God commands it. But what about the things that you're supposed to do that are good? What you have, in my estimation, in the Torah and the Tanakh generally, that's the Old Testament, are two paths. And I've talked about these two paths for a long time. We could talk about, for instance, why did Abraham take his son Isaac in the story to go sacrifice him, and then it took God to intervene to stop him? Why did Abraham even go down that path? Well, I'm not going to get into that tonight, but it's a very important question. The situation we have here is, are you going to use God as the excuse to commit acts of atrocities? Are you going to do that because God said it's okay? Or are you going to be like Moses, the story of Moses, or Abraham? Let's take the Moses one first. And under the story there in Exodus, God gets upset at Israel because of what they're doing. He says he's going to destroy them and make his covenant now with Moses. And Moses says, oh, wait a minute. You know, you're going to back down? What are all those Egyptians going to say? God took them out in the wilderness to slaughter them? Is that what you want? No. Let's rethink this. And then Abraham did the same thing when he bargained with God to not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for 10 people. And I'm not going to go through the whole story here. But the point is, I think that what we're given is two paths. And just because God says to do something evil doesn't mean you should. You should have a little parlay with him, in my estimation. And that has been my experience, and apparently the experience that we're supposed to pay attention to in the Torah, and the Tanakh generally, and in life for that matter. So tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how this God that Israel says it's its own, Jews say it's its own. Jews will call it Hashem, meaning the name. They'll call it Adonai, meaning my Lord. And there's some other names, of course, that are in the Bible, and some people will say that those are names of other gods. I'm not going there tonight, but if you want to delve into that, you can go look at Dr. Bart Ehrman, Dr. Kip Davis, just as an example. I've mentioned them before, or even to some extent Dr. James Tabor, who I've talked about quite a bit. But the bottom line is that they wanted to take this God that they apparently got out of nowhere. It just popped out of nowhere. Even in the Torah, the story about it, they didn't know who this God was. They knew him by God Almighty. And we're going to show you some problems with the actual texts on that tonight too. But they took this God because they wanted something different than any of the other nations had. El wouldn't work alone. Baal, of course, wasn't going to work. The different gods of the Egyptians, the different gods of the Canaanites or the Assyrians or whoever, you know, the Greeks, for instance, whatever. They wanted their own God. They wanted their own national identity. And this God was one who, when they fashioned him after their own image, what they wanted was a God that would destroy anyone who would stand in their way. And what did they mean by anybody would stand in their way? Well, initially, it was about subverting their movement through the wilderness, trying to get to the promised land, the people that prohibited them or inhibited them in that. But now, today, and you know who I'm talking about, I don't have to give the name, right? Now, today, it's anybody who stands against them or says that there's a problem with them. Now, all of a sudden, they're Amalek and they can be taken out. And I've talked about that quite a bit on X. And I've talked about it to some extent here. You can go back and look at it. But the point is where did they get this God that they call Hashem, particularly as it's known in Christian circles and others, Yahweh or some other pronunciations, which I won't go into. There are a whole bunch of them that people argue about. But you know who I'm talking about. YHVH, the Yod He Vav He, okay? And the subversion that took place was so that they could justify all of their political motivations. And there are going to be people that will be screaming and hollering about that, pulling their hair out saying, oh, no, that's not what we did. Oh, yes, it is. Okay? Now, we're going to get into some things here. As you'll recall, I've talked about Dr. Yonatan Adler's book, The Origins of Judaism. Very important book. It's an easy read. It's not difficult, but it gives you a lot of good information about where this thing developed. And it didn't develop in 1400 BC. It just didn't. Okay? It was much later than that, as far as the use by the so-called Israelites, and not the Jews. The Jews are one tribe, the Judahites. But the Israelites as a whole, it didn't even start there. At first, when he first opens up on this book, as you'll read it, you'll find that he says he has to do some apologetics. He says, well, look, I'm Jewish, I'm not attacking the Torah or the Tanakh. I stand firmly behind the Jewish people and Israel and all this stuff. And then he goes and he basically shows the archaeological evidence that they're full of BS. All right? That's what this book is. I'm going to read some things a little later on that are in about beware of the priests. You know where I've talked about before about that. But also some lies that come out right in the beginning of this whole thing with the Israelite religion and what they were really about. Now the problem, of course, is that almost all of our Western religions have come down from that. Christianity certainly did. Judaism certainly did. Rabbinic Judaism, Rabbinic Talmudic Judaism, and even Islam was based on this. Now, Islam doesn't go into the Yahweh part. It doesn't. It uses the name Allah, of course, which is really just the Arabic way of saying the Aramaic or the Hebrew Eloah. All right? El-Oah. Eloah. That's all it is. They just turned it into the Arabic and it became Allah. It's the same word. So it's all based on this story that starts really, supposedly, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago? When in fact, it starts in Babylon in about 600 BC, maybe a little before, maybe even as far as 800 BC. And a lot of people, like I said, are going to get really ticked off about that. Yeah, we're going to be talking about Jeremiah 8:8 here in a minute, emergency exit. But the whole point is it's poisoned our minds about who we are, the way they interpret it, and the way they presented it to the world. It's poisoned our minds as to who we are and what our righteousness, what our honesty with our fellow man, our concern for our fellow man should be. They're not beasts of the field, as these people preach, to be annihilated. Now, again, I got to make an apology for a lot of the Jewish people are out there. They don't feel the way that things are progressing in Israel is correct, okay? They don't believe that you should harm your fellow man, okay? I know that. The problem is it's in their literature. It's in their Torah. It's in their Tanakh. And it's certainly in the Talmud. So if they're Jewish and they're following the Talmud, you've seen me post some of that here and on X. There's some really nasty stuff, and I'm not going to get into that tonight either, but it goes to my point that they changed this God from what it really was supposed to be, because nobody else was actually embracing it. There was one group, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. It has to do with this, and I've talked about it before. So they used, like the Phoenician, they started using the Phoenician language apparently. There's some scholarly arguments about that, but they changed it so that it would be more just for them. Okay, their own language, their own written characters, all that kind of business going on. This is a manufactured thing as far as the way it's applied in modern day religions of Judaism, which of course would include the Zionistic political part of it, Christianity, and Islam. Okay, let's go and talk some specifics. What they did was they moved from that this name was to be a blessing to mankind, and they were supposed to be in that image, which I've talked about before, which is the Tzelem, which you see right here, and I know you probably can't see this all very well. The Tzelem, I showed you how that's not actually an idol. That's how to be in God's likeness, be a righteous person in this world. That's what the Tzelem in the image is supposed to mean. They changed it from the blessing to mankind to one of the excuse for world domination, ruling, tyranny over mankind. Not teaching them how to do the right thing, but being rulers over it, the force of, you see it today. Okay, what's going on in Israel today. And if you listen to a lot of the things that are on Twitter, X rather, and even here that I've alluded to, you can see how they look to those they call Amalek. And their entire deal with Amalek is to destroy all of them. And one of the groups of Amalek are white Christians, both in Europe and in the U.S. This might get me thrown off YouTube, but it'll be a coup de grace, right? I wish I could do a lot more because this is a very deep subject. But anyway, what they engage in actually is actual real blasphemy, because they claim to follow this name, but they're not in the image of that name. They've transformed it into a war god, a storm god. That didn't just come from Sumer or from some other group. They were the ones that actually made it. Now, I've got to make a caveat here, and some people are going to say, well, how do you know, Roy, as far as what this is like? I can tell you that, at least to men, when this God comes, it comes in thunder and wind. Now, I know Elijah was looking for God in the thunder and the wind and all that, and he wasn't there, and then the still small voice. But the first time it comes, it's overpowering. And then the still small voice comes in first. There's a reason for that. So that's where the idea of the storm god came from. It sounds like a storm. It absolutely 100% does. I'm not sure it happens to women that way, but I'm not going to talk about that. The next thing I want to show is that this YHVH is unlike any other deity anywhere in the world. It's a description of a system. You've heard me talk about that. It's a family oriented concept. It is relations. The Native Americans, as I told one friend of mine today, when the Native Americans go and pray, or they go into a sweat lodge, for instance, one of the things they're saying is, all my relations, and some of you who have done that will know exactly what I mean. All my relations mean that we're interconnected. This isn't New Age. I'm not going into New Age stuff. I believe this is a real world. We're real men and women. It's not just some simulation. The simulation we're going through is that we do have a temporary structure here. But that is hopefully going to change. Anyway, that name is a blueprint for all mankind. Nobody else has that. There are gods in the old world that, as I've told you before, the gods were attached to the ground. You go to, if you're, let's say you live in Africa and you go to Rome, you're going to respect the Roman gods. But Jupiter the main Roman god, and Zeus, the Greek god, are really the same one. They just give different names to them, that they're really the same concept. And that's pretty much the way it is in most religions. Some of the Vedic and Indian Hindu concepts are a little bit different. But at any rate, as far as we're talking about with the Western societies that have developed down through the ages, that's the case. Okay? All right. So that's where we want to start. And then I wanted to read a couple of things about who lied. And then we're going to get into the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Who lied? I have this thing here on Melchizedek. And the reason why is because he was the priest of the Most High God. What does that mean? Is that a different God than Yahweh? Well, we can get into an argument about that or a discussion, but that's not our purpose here. I just wanted to put it up so you know that I'm talking about that. I'm trying to rush. Not because I want to get through it and avoid you all. I'm afraid the clock over here is going to chime at 7 o'clock. If it does, we'll just stop for a minute. I'll just slow down here now. The hierarchy of family members is what that's about, actually. The priest of the Most High God, El Elyon. If you go listen to James Tabor, he talks about the force of forces. In the Star Wars, a lot of Christians were all upset because in Star Wars it talks about the force. Well, in Hebrew, El really means the force. And El Elyon means the force, the highest force of all the forces. So actually, George Lucas wasn't that far off, but I thought it was funny how everybody was making fun of it. We're going to read the Papyrus of Ani in here, and you're going to see something that's really quite surprising. So let me take this off of here. We won't need this for right now. And I've got to be careful how I do it because it's taped on. Like I was telling you, I didn't have a whiteboard that I could use. This I thought was one, but the pen didn't work. So anyway, okay, we're going to talk about who lied. Some very strange things about the name Yahweh. Now, this has been argued amongst rabbis and explained in some really bizarre ways. It's been talked about by scholars and others. But when I say that the Bible is not the ineffable, inerrant, infallible Word of God, I'm going to give you another example. I've given a lot in the past. I'm going to give you another one right now. Let's go to Exodus 6:2-5. By the way, as I said earlier, this is not quite a religious, spiritual discussion, but it has to be to some extent because it's impacting world situations today. It could cause a nuclear war. Okay, just like the problem in Ukraine. It could go there. At the very least, it's destroying tens of thousands, if not in the end hundreds of thousands of innocent people's lives just because they're different people. They're considered animals by the people that are waging war on them. They even call them that. You know, they dehumanize them so they can take them out. And that's against the image of God, which we're supposed to portray here, and of course the YHVH. Let's read this. Exodus 6:2-5. So it's kind of important that we get some of this background information. Okay, 6:2-5. Here we go. And God spake unto Moses, and said unto him, I am Yahweh. And I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob by the name of El Shaddai, God Almighty. But by my name Jehovah, Yahweh, was I not known to them. Okay? You just heard in Exodus, which is many, many hundreds of years after Abraham, that this Yahweh is saying that he was not known to Abraham by that name. That Moses is just finding it out. Okay? That's what he's saying. Well, now let's go to Genesis 13:4 and see what it says there. 13:4. Unto the place of the altar which he has made, let's talk about Abram, before he changed his name to Abraham. Unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of Yahweh. What? Exodus just said that Abraham didn't know Yahweh, so how is he going to, by that name? He was known by El Shaddai, El Shadi. So there's a contradiction right there. Which is it? Which is the truth? Why is there this obfuscation going on? Let's go to Genesis 14:22. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto Yahweh, the Most High God, El Elyon. So there, Abraham equates Yahweh with El Elyon. the possessor of heaven and earth. Now wait a minute. Again, Exodus says that he hadn't revealed his name to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as Yahweh. Now let's go to 18:22, Genesis 18:22. And there it says, and the men turned their faces from thence and went towards Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before Yahweh. Why is this happening? Is it because the redactors, Ezra and those people around 600 BC during the Babylonian captivity couldn't keep their story straight? You know, when you lie, you can't keep your story straight. When you lie, you can't. Eventually, you're going to get caught. And of course, I see emergency exit there. I keep telling about Jeremiah 8:8. And I talked about this a long time ago. Brought it up again here a few months back. Jeremiah 8:8 talks about the lying scribes. The scribes were usually Sadducees, but they were also Levitical priests. All right? And you notice I've talked about beware the priests. The priests will screw you every chance they get. They'll act so high and mighty and righteous, and it's all for their own benefit, economically and authoritarian-wise. Okay, let's look at this 8:8. This is what it says. And this was such a sensitive issue that when King James had it translated, he changed a little bit, but I'm going to read it with the original, okay? It says, what the King James says is, how do ye say, we are wise, and the law of Yahweh is with us? Lo, certainly in vain made he it. The pen of the scribes is in vain. Well, what it actually says in the Hebrew is, the pen of the scribes lied, all right? So we have all of that testimony there that there's something wrong with the origins of our Western Abrahamic religions. They've all been corrupted, and they were corrupted a long time ago, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Okay, let's talk about the earliest that we know Yahweh, the name Yahweh appears. There's some scholarly debate about this, but basically there are some three arguments. The earliest is the Book of the Dead, interestingly enough, in Egypt. When they find a theophoric name, theophoric means a name that's attached to God. It's kind of like Yeshayahu, the Yahoo part, or the Yeremiyahu, or today you see it in Netanyahu, the Yahoo part. That's a theophoric name. That's making a connection between your name and God. And it's kind of serious to do that. But they noticed it in 1400 BC was the first time they saw it. Not in the Hebrew, amongst the Hebrew people, but amongst the Egyptians, who were Hyksos at the time, which were, Hyksos means shepherd kings. So they were Semites, they were Hebrews apparently. But this 1400 BC time period, again, 1400 BC, we're talking about the time of Moses. He hadn't even been on the Exodus, or he just got there. Now the Egyptians are talking about this Yahweh? Huh? There is an argument for 2500 BC, but we also have the Mesha Stela, which is, kind of a stone inscription, in 840 BC, which makes a lot of sense because the redactors were starting to use this stuff, talking about Ezra and the Babylonian captivity about 600 BC. Okay, so those are the earliest ones. Now, when we get to Budge, we'll talk about the Rosetta Stone. Okay? I might as well do that now. The Rosetta Stone was found, if any of you know what that is, the Rosetta Stone was found in about 1870, somewhere in there. And it had 3 languages listed on it. When I talked about it earlier today, I mistook one. I sometimes say Coptic for Demotic, and I did it today. There are 3 languages on there. There's Egyptian hieroglyphics of the Ptolemaic period, Demotic, which is Egyptian in the Ptolemaic period, Ptolemy being one of the generals of Alexander the Great, and Ptolemy had control over Egypt. He actually became pharaoh, and his family did. Cleopatra was a Ptolemy, okay? And then the 3rd language was Greek. Those are the 3 languages, all right? This all happened, the Rosetta Stone was apparently made, it was a decree that was made in about 196 BC. 2nd century BC, all right? And again, it was in the demonic Greek and hieroglyphics. That stone was used by Wallace Budge in his expansion of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Excellent work for the time. There are scholars today that think that they've gone beyond what Budge did, but I can guarantee you they all have Budge's work in their library because it was quite a feat, all right? So we're going to read some of that. Let's read from the Book of the Dead. And I showed this earlier, I don't know, several months back about this picture here. In this particular book, this is my pocket version of the Book of the Dead. I have the large one too, which is much more, has a lot more information in it. But this is the one, you remember this picture? Here's who they call Ani. Ani, by the way, means I am. I talked about that before, right? Here's this Egyptian supposed servant or whoever that's died and is being escorted into the afterlife, and he's being introduced to Osiris here, and these two women that stand beside Osiris. And I explained to you before that this picture here, you see that? Osiris and these two women is exactly what the tetragrammaton is. Can you see this down here? Yod, that's the male, then the female attached to the female. That was an early Egyptian hieroglyphic that Moses didn't even have anything to do with, about Yahweh. And it was depicted by Osiris, the picture of Osiris. All right? I talked about that before. All right, let's read this. Why am I going through all of this? Because what this is really about isn't about violence, revenge, taking over land, or any of that. That's all man-made stuff through the Levitical priests and the politicians, including King David, I might add. Let's read this. This is from plate 4 of the Book of the Dead. Ani, now this is Budge's translation. I'm not saying it's 100% correct, okay? But there's enough here that I think that if you listen to it, you might be fascinated by it. Ani found just. Remember the Egyptians talked about the weight, the heart with the feather, and if the heart weighed more than the feather, you didn't get to enter into a good portion of the afterlife. You were kept in some other place, or maybe not at all. Very important. The Egyptians weren't the bad guys that they're depicted in the Torah. Okay, or even in the Tanakh. Ani, found just, is led into the presence of Osiris. On the left, the hawk-headed god Horus, the son of Isis, wearing the double crown of the north and the south, takes Ani by the hand and leads him forward towards Osiris, the Lord of eternity. And it's going to turn out that this is what we would know as the YHVH. Who is enthroned on the right within a shrine in the form of a funeral chest. The god wears the Atef crown with plumes. A menet hangs from the back of his neck, and he holds in his hands the crook and the scepter. The crook and scepter and the flail. The crook is the Hebrew form of it is the kuf, that looks like a P, all right? And the flail is the lamed, and they cross it like that, and that shows their right to rule. All right, let's skip down through some of this and read the actual translation, okay, of this. Well, and it's certainly not, by the way, it's this translation is certainly not comprehensive. Look how much information is there, including all of these different hieroglyphs and things here. So Budge is making a good effort, but what we have here is fascinating. And it has to do with what we're about here. What have I said? What is Jesus attributed as saying? That all that I have, that I've inherited all that the Father has, and you are co-heirs with me, right? Jesus was an heir of all that the Father has, and you are joint heirs with him. I go to prepare a place for you, a mansion. There are many mansions in my Father's house. There are many, and the actual word there talks about chambers. Saith Horus, the son of Isis. I have come unto thee, O Unifer, and I have brought thee, listen to this, look, he doesn't just call him Ani. And I have brought the Osiris Ani unto thee. Now, Horus is talking to Osiris. Horus is talking to Osiris to bring Ani into his presence. But he calls Ani a pre-name of Osiris himself. Why? Because that's the aspiration. It's a family effort. His heart is found righteous, coming forth from the balance. Remember I just said, the heart balanced with the feather. And it hath not sinned against God or goddess. Thoth hath weighed in according to the decree uttered unto him by the company of the gods. And it is very, Psalms 82, the council in heaven. And it is very true and righteous. Grant him cakes and ale, and let him enter into the presence of Osiris. And again, Horus called Ani Osiris Ani. And may he be like unto the followers of Horus forever. Behold, Osiris Ani saith, O Lord of Amentet, the underworld, I am in thy presence. There is no sin in me. I have not lied wittingly, nor have I done aught with a false heart. Grant that I may be like unto those favored ones. Favored ones? Back to the Psalms 82. Who are round about thee, and that I may be an Osiris. That I may be like you. Greatly favored, and the beautiful God and beloved of the Lord of the world, and a royal scribe indeed, who loveth him Ani, triumphant before the God Osiris. That's what Yahweh is about. And it's not just the chosen people, so-called, that they got that chosen for themselves. The chosen people had a requirement to fulfill, and they failed on every front. The biggest one being that they were supposed to be a light to the world and be in God's image, righteously judging and being like their father, quote unquote, Abraham, showing loving kindness. When you have two paths, one vengeance and violence, and the other loving kindness, which are you going to do? And I hear all these machinations amongst the rabbis and Zionist, the Christian ministers, talking about it's okay because God ordained it. No, God gave you an opportunity to make a choice, and you did the wrong one. And it's in the name that you did the wrong one, and you perverted this name. Who has? You all know who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about specifically people here. Now, I've come to be pretty close. Now, I don't know who they are, but I've become pretty close with at Torah Jews and at Torah Judaism on X, and also some other Jewish people. And I don't mean to make it sound like I'm attacking them. I think at least the people that I have run into and had associations with who are Jewish, they try to do the right thing. They try to be good, and they even object to what's happening in Israel. But there's still, and if I was able to sit down with them and talk to them, I'd say, but there's still the problem with the Levitical priesthood. Beware the priests. Beware the priests using their positions to control the people. You really think God told the people that they had to do all those mitzvot? I don't think so. If you look at those things very closely, they're made to control people. Oh, but the Israelites weren't obeying God, so they had to be reined in. Really? Or is it, again, as I said, a subversion of the name YHVH? And then, of course, there's a political aspect of it. I talked about David. He made the decision himself to move the Ark of the Covenant from Mount Gerizim and Shiloh up to Jerusalem so he could consolidate his power. And then you have Samuel. The book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, is really a problems. One of them is what? Judah and the blessing from Jacob, Israel, was that the scepter would not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver beneath his feet until Shiloh comes. Now, Shiloh could be the peacemaker and all that, but it also has to do with Ephraim. But that's another story I've talked about before. My point here is this. If the scepter was to remain with Judah, why did Samuel anoint a Benjamite, Saul? Why? It's another hint about what's going on with these people. Okay, so we talked about who lied. We weren't able to get that straight. It's a mess of confusion. Talked about the earliest signs of where the Yahweh comes from, and it wasn't Hebraic. We talked about the Rosetta Stone, and now I want to move over to here. The I Am. Trey Smith, as you all know, did a great video on the I Am, finding it in Imhotep. Imhotep was the name of an Egyptian aristocrat, and Imhotep means I speak for the I Am. And I thought there was a problem with the transliteration there, and I went after it, and it turned out that Trey Smith was correct. Ani being another version of the I Am, okay, which says something else about that story I just read you about Ani being the Osiris Ani, Osiris the I Am. Why, when Moses asks God his name on Mount Sinai, the response is Ahayeh, Asher Ahayeh. That's the first person. I am. I am. The A, the Aleph is I, and then the Hayeh is exist, okay? So I exist, first person, it's me. James Tabor goes into that quite a bit, if any of you have followed him, and he shows how if you simplify that down, it actually means is, was, will. He is, he was, and he will do. He will be. And I've given you the translation of I will be whom I will be, but it's first person. So we get that with Moses. Then all of a sudden, you get this name YHVH, right? Yahweh. Which when you take it right from the grammatical part of the word, it means he exists. It's talking about that in the third person. So why would God in Exodus say that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob didn't know me by my name, he exists? Why wouldn't he say, yeah, I exist? Just something to think about. So what happens is, you go from this third person, first person, Ahaya, to the third person, Yahweh. Okay? And earlier it would be done with a yod, but you get to the vav, of course, like you see here. And that means he exists. He has consciousness. Well, that's interesting. Why doesn't he say, why didn't God say, if he was like all the other gods, I sit on the throne of thrones. You obey me or I'll squash you like an ant, whatever. That's not what he says. He identifies himself with consciousness. I am. I exist. Another way to say it is, we've heard this before, I think, therefore I am. It's a sentient being who's conscious of his or herself, and realizing that others, he's conscious of others being conscious of themselves. And it's to lift the entire group up. It can also mean I breathe, he breathes, and of course we get breathe from that, we get to live, and we get Hava or Eve from that as well. She is the mother of all living. All of that's related. This is talking about consciousness, and I brought up on my X account and I think today on the prelude to this video, the earlier video, I talked about Julian Jaynes in his book, which I used when I wrote The Crimson Thread. It's in the bibliography. The origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. The bicameral mind meaning that one side was kind of like the side that talks to you, all right, before you're really conscious of your efforts. You just do. You're hungry, so you go eat. You're scared, so you run. Those kinds of things. It doesn't really have a concept of existence of consciousness. He explains in that book that about the same time that this story of Moses occurred, which actually was probably not written, and I know it takes some people off here, but it was probably in different verbal forms, maybe in some writings, but we really don't see much of the Torah or certainly those mitzvot and things until around the Babylonian captivity with the redactions that are done by Ezra. Again, a priest, a Levitical priest. What are they doing there? Why did the Mayan priests predict eclipses and tell the people it was God angry and that they had to give them of their substance and sacrifice some of their people to have the God go away? It's the same thing. It's manipulation. Yahweh doesn't do that. It's in his name. He's the God of loving kindness who perpetuates a system which I've talked about before. Oh, here we are. The Rise of Consciousness of Man, Julian Jaynes. I just brought that up. And scholars recognize that the Iliad and the Odyssey, written by Homer, a few hundred years difference there between the story of Moses, and we really don't know when that happened. The Middle Kingdom period of Egypt, nobody really knows what was going on there. It's very difficult to ascertain. But this thing with Ani is one example, and there's evidence that was well known centuries, maybe millennia before. It was an Egyptian idea, interestingly enough. Okay. So the developing concept of self-awareness in yourself and others, that's true consciousness. Do unto what you do unto the least of these my brethren you have done unto me. That is consciousness elevated. Understanding beauty. Giving others the same chances you have. Nurturing loving kindness. Some people say, well, Roy, this is Christianity. Not really. Not really. Christianity morphed into something else as well. That you are not responsible for your own salvation. God's done it all for you. You don't have to change at all. All you do is, and some Christians will disagree with this, but basically it comes down to faith is all you need. You don't have to do anything else. And there's that big argument between Paul and James over that whole issue. Okay, again, this consciousness thing was noticed and described around 1700 to 1400 BC. Remember, it would be about 1700 BC that Joseph of Egypt, Joseph and the family of Jacob, Israel, went into, under the story of the Torah, went into Egypt. And then they apparently were expelled around somewhere between 1400 and 1200 BC. And it's interesting because, again, you have these stories of Osiris, of Atenaken, the spokesman for Aten, the god Aten, the monotheism that developed there. Not that there is only one God, that's not what they were getting at. It's the one God that they were going to pay attention to, even though they admitted that there were other gods, as I explained earlier in the video here. The gods are fashioned to the ground. You go to Rome, you do what the Romans do, that kind of thing. But this gets played in a little bit later. Okay, so here we go to the Tetragrammaton again. And it is describing our relationship to God and Him to us, more so than any other deity. His order and our process of maturation. When you're told that God has chosen you for a specific mission, to go into the earth and save the 70 nations. They used to do that. The Jews used to have, when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, I've talked about this before, he would pray for the 70 nations of the world, not just for the Jews, and not to overcome everybody else and to rule them tyrannically. That's not what they did in earlier Israelite culture. It's a method. It's not a name, YHVH, but a description, a method, a system. All sentient beings, especially man, connected. A family. You can't, if you're chosen and God's going to destroy everybody else or make them your slaves, that's a perversion of the very name. And you're not in the image of that when you're doing those things that harm others. Even when you say it's for your self-defense, there's a point at which it's no longer self-defense. And I think, I'm not going to go into the details of that again, that could get me thrown off of here, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so what is this process? Well, in the Torah, it talks about the man-woman relationship, obviously, and throughout the Tanakh. In the New Testament, it gets all muddied, all right? And there's a reason for that. It was Hellenized because the Greek thought is that sex isn't important, and that in the afterlife, if there is one, and they did think there was one, the Hellenized Greeks, that there's no sexual identification. Christianity went there. And as a result of that, we have a lot of problems today with what they call gender identity, right? The Christians started this. They started down that road 2 millennia ago. To be a eunuch for the kingdom of God's sake didn't mean that you didn't get married. It meant that you would go do your thing, do your military time or whatever, and come back home. They didn't castrate themselves. That's not what it meant. The Romans thought it was castrated. They called circumcision a castration. And they would consider you a eunuch if you had circumcision done. So there were some other plays on words there that today most Christians especially don't understand. The Jews laugh their asses off at you. What is this process? I've talked about it before. The process is male and female. The opening and closing of the eyes is another example of the tetragrammaton. The opening and the closing of the eyes talked about in Genesis 2. Genesis 2, 21 to 22. I'm going kind of fast now because I want to kind of get wrapped up here as soon as I can. Again, here's the example here. You have the Yod and He. I've covered all this before. The Yod being male, the He being female, and you have that explained here with a male, female, female. And this is the exact picture of Osiris in that Book of the Dead. Exactly. Male, female, female. I'm not pushing plural marriage here. I'm saying that this was an identification of this in the Egyptian hieroglyphics. That's all I'm saying. You can make it out to be whatever you would like, but I think you need to be aware that it's there. It was in the Egyptian, okay, and apparently there for a long time. Now some people say, well, Sumer was an older civilization. Well, there's some questions about that now. Scholars are now thinking, archaeologists are now thinking that Egypt and Sumer probably rose about the same time, about 4,000 years ago or even earlier, okay? Again, that's not our purpose here. Okay, beware the priests. I've talked about all this before. I'm not going to go there tonight. We talked about Jeremiah 8:8. We talked about, well, let's read a few of them because this is what happened. They took this name. This is the storm god. This is our God we're his chosen, and we can do anything we damn well please as long as we follow the 613 mitzvot, which we're not going to really be able to do, but that's okay. We're not going to worry about blessing others. We're going to worry about taking battle and taking what is rightfully ours because we're the chosen. That's the attitude. And not all Jews are like that, but we're seeing it play out in the Middle East today, and we're seeing it with a lot of Christian ministers who I would call Christian Zionists now, pushing for the same thing. Let's have Armageddon. Is that following through YHVH means? Loving kindness. Yeah, in the YHVH there are two parts. There's, let's see if I wrote it down here somewhere. I think I did. Depending upon the vowels that are used, it can mean, here it is right here. It gives you the option, the name gives you the option of showing loving kindness, doing good, or being a destroyer. It's both there, because what does it say in the Torah and in other places? I destroy and I make alive. I make alive and I destroy. It's in the name. It goes both ways. But that goes back to the path that I tell you to follow. Which one are you going to choose? Just because God tells you to, are you going to do it? Because you can do it, does that mean you should? Or should you be like Moses and Abraham and parley with God for a better outcome? Sometimes you got to be involved in self-defense. Self-defense is not destroying other people totally. As a matter of fact, that's evil. I don't care what the mitzvot says. I've heard rabbis say, you got to do a mitzvot every day, one of which is to blot Amalek out, blot his memory out. Well, they take it to the furthest extent. Kill them all. And white Christians in particular, it's not just the Palestinians, white Christians in particular fall in that same category. Okay, I think I will read Jeremiah. We know about 8:8 where he talks about the lying scribes. Let's read 7:11 through 24. I don't know if I want to do that much. So which God is it? Is it the God that tells you to go out and destroy and take land and steal people's houses and kill the men, women, and children because you don't want them propagating and all that? Is that really what it's about? Well, let's read what Jeremiah chapter 7:11 through 24 says. And this says, then will I cause you to dwell in this place in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. Forever and ever is the word olam, all right? It's not the word for eternity. It just means for a time, and it's based on a contract. Behold, ye trust in lying words that cannot profit. Will ye steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and burn incense, and debauch, and walk for other gods whom ye know not, and come and stand before me in this house which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all those abominations? Is this house which is called by my name become a den of robbers in your eyes, stealing people's lands, all that stuff? Taking their lives so that you can take over their property, plundering others for the furtherance of your goals? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. But go ye now to my place, which was in Shiloh. There we are. Where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. Now because ye have done all these works, saith the Lord, and I spake unto you, rising up early and speaking, but ye heard not, and I called you, but ye answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house. He destroys not just the temple, he destroys the house of Israel, which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave to you and your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. In other words, the northern kingdoms that were defeated by the Assyrians. And I will cast you out of my sight, as I have cast out all your brethren. Whoa. They testified to themselves that they're not doing what God said. Now, there will be people say, well, he restored it later. He changed his mind just like he did with Moses and all that. Well, by their fruits you will know them, and you can tell that that's not the case. Okay, let's see. You can read the rest of it for yourself. I don't want to take too much time. Amos 8:2 is, well, I'll tell you what. Let me just tell you what these are. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these. Jeremiah 8:8, Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 11 through 24. Amos chapter 8, verse 2, Amos chapter 4 to 7, and Amos chapter 9, verses 9 to 10. Did I write that down wrong? Yeah, probably, but you'll get the idea. Amos 5:21 to 26, and a big one, Hosea 6:6. I've talked about all of these before. Okay, and here comes an interesting one. I mentioned it earlier on. Did Jesus ever say anything about Yahweh? Not directly. Not where you would have noticed it. But there's a scripture, now this is attributed to him, I'm not saying this actually happened, could have, but the point that I'm making here is this system, this name itself. John 8:48 to 59. He says, before Abraham was, I am. The I am is the achayeh, which, when put into the third person, becomes the yod he vah he. Okay? Basically saying he exists. Let me see if there's anything else here I want to wrap up. They consider this name so holy, the Jews do, that they use other words in its place. G, blank, D, Adonai, Hashem, and there's some others. Why did they do that when there are other places where God said he wanted this name, this image, this loving kindness spread throughout the world? Why would they not let that happen? Because, again, the bottom line became control of the world, rulership of the world, taking from others what you think is yours, even though it wasn't. Claiming that God gave it to you and justifying taking it, even taking other people's lives in order to get it. They don't let the name speak for itself. They demand you submit to their interpretation of it. I'm expanding your ability to interpret what this means, and it's not what's happening by and large in rabbinic Talmudic Judaism today, or in Christianity, and certainly not in Islam. Islam, as I've often said, was just put together from Talmudic Judaism and Messianic militant Judaism, which you know as Christianity from the first century. That was the two were just amalgamated, so they're all based on pretty much the same thing. Hashem or Adonai is usually what they use. They don't like to say YHVH, and again, why? Hide the universal kinship of mankind. They don't want you to understand that this talks about the universal family, kinship, because they're the chosen ones. They're the ones that God is going to save and destroy everybody else. Sounds kind of Christian too in a lot of ways too, doesn't it? Certainly Islamic in some ways, but Islam doesn't even say it quite the same way. You have Sharia law, which is really nasty, and you have the Noahide laws, which the Sharia laws are very similar. Here come the chimes I was telling you about, so I apologize for that. It's going to play a little song here. I hope it doesn't get recognized by the algorithm there. Maybe I can get real close and talk over it while it's playing here. It'll take about a minute. Now let's see whatever we got here. I hope this has been of some interest. What does it come down to? That the name Yahweh was subverted so that the people could say that they are God's only chosen people. Not all of mankind, which is what the word actually means. And that you follow a certain concept, a certain structure, a certain order. Oh, no, they don't want you to know that. They're the chosen people and they're going to rule over you. If you want to look at where the Russian Revolution came from, if you want to look at the Bolsheviks, if you want to look at Marx, if you want to look at the Balfour Declaration and all these things, you'll notice people say, well, stop blaming them for all the troubles in the world. I'm not. I know there are other organizations, but there is this thread of this influence to claim that they're chosen by that name, that God, which isn't really a God at all, but it's a process, a system. And it's a system of loving kindness, and it's a system, as I've said, I'm repeating myself a lot, and it's this system here. In Genesis 2:21 to 22, it gives it. It's why I say that the male-female relationship is so important, and that's why it's been attacked, and efforts have been made to destroy it and to subvert it and to to make it degenerate, to say that it's an evil thing, that it's dirty, it's filthy. It can be, it can turn into that, but they basically turn the living nature of a man and woman the same way that they turn the nature of YHVH. Okay. I guess if there are any questions, let's see if we've got any going on here. We are all one. Yeah, in a way, Elizabeth, we are. And of course, there's that prayer of Jesus. And again, I'm not a traditional Christian, certainly not an evangelical, not a Catholic, none of those. All of them, and I know I get a lot of people upset when I say this, but they've all gone this. I mean, I see good Christians and Jews who are upset about what's going on in Israel now. But if you'd stop for a minute and realize how that control has been cemented for them, you've actually contributed to it. You haven't checked out the facts of the religion that you hold dear. Its order. Don't think I haven't made the mistake myself. It's taken me many decades to understand this and to try to reverse course, or at least correct my course. Let's put it that way. I'm just trying to give you some insight from my experience that you might be able to use. So it comes down to this. The Hebrews didn't come up with this name. There's some arguments about, if Abraham even existed, but if he did, whether Abraham brought this information to the Egyptians or whether the Egyptians gave it to Abraham. I'm going with the latter. I think the Egyptians had this earlier. They talked about the resurrection, Osiris, the thing about Osiris and his phallus and his resurrection, and Isis getting, pregnant by the resurrected Isis. Osiris. The idea of resurrection was known by the Egyptians, not by the Semites, not so much, if at all, not until their sojourn in Egypt. And as we've seen, the Egyptian idea was a heart and a feather. Your heart can't weigh more than a feather when you go into the afterlife. Now it's, if you don't bow down to our laws and our mitzvot or our Sharia or our Noahide, God's going to destroy you. You have to bow down to us because we're God's representatives on earth. Well, if you're God's representatives, you would do what he first told you to do, which is to be an example, to help people, help widows and orphans, not make widows and orphans, not kill children, not try to define every person that stands against you or counter to you, like myself now, as a Malik, that now you've got a free ride to destroy. You're choosing the wrong path if you do that. That's how it's been subverted. And the whole world has been fooled by it. They're starting to wake up, I think, but then you're examining the very roots of your religion or your faith, and it's hard, because then you say, what do I do? Well, I'll tell you what you do. You do the right thing. You treat your fellow man right. You don't plunder him for gain. You don't kill him for gain. You be the example of the right way to go. That sounds pretty Christian, doesn't it? Yeah, I guess. Rabbi Hillel said it pretty well, too, and long before Jesus came along. By the way, you know that I don't think Jesus was the way he was depicted in the New Testament. If you look in my book, The Crimson Thread, if you listen to what I've talked about, my religion series here on YouTube, go to the playlist, the religion series, there on the playlist, or the Eisenman series, there on the playlist, you'll see that my concept of what that person was, is, and will be was his will, will is was, is not the Christian idea today. Why did this God say, don't make a graven image? Because it's not alive, it's not conscious. He gave you consciousness. He gave you the ability to be empathetic. Make decisions to defend yourself, that's one thing. But the empathy of consciousness is what's important. Alrighty. I'll let you chew on that for a while. Let me see if I've got any really big. Let me pull this over here. I guess we can talk for a little bit. I mean, why not? I'm sure that I hope you understand where I'm talking here, what all this was about. It's about subverting the name, the system, so that you can claim rulership of the world. That's how it's been subverted. Yeah, chosen by who? That's a good. Yeah, let me give you an example there, John Murphy. He says, chosen by who? The ones that destroyed and melted advanced civilization built by benevolent giants. Let me give you a hint. Let me do this. God told me I'm a chosen man. And he's given me all of Washington State as an inheritance for myself and my posterity. And if you get in my way, Washington State, God's told me that I can come in and take it and mistreat you in the process. Does me making that claim make it true? No. And what does the last 4,000 years of that claim prove out as today? They've had to do it by subversion, by deception. Does God lie? Depends. He told a lying spirit to go fool Ahab, but that was because Ahab had already rejected him. Gee, I wonder who the people in Israel have rejected now. If they don't slow down, they're going to become 70 AD all over again. Which reminds me, I heard just before I went live that the Galilee is moving towards independence from the rest of Israel. Whoa. I don't know if this is a disinformation or not. I'm going to check on it. But the northern provinces there, they're not called that. The northern territories of Israel, the Galilee, are so upset with what's happening in Tel Aviv, they want to separate from the rest of Israel. From what I got earlier today, just before I went on. Okay, Kathy Marshall, they told us in the church not to read the Gnostic Gospels. Why? That's how you learn. Yeah, somebody tells you not to look at something, they're afraid of what you might find out. Or they're going to say, oh no, it's going to deceive you. Well, that's not their job to protect you from investigating. It's like I said a few minutes ago. God gives you two paths. He wants you to make the decision. If you make a mistake, and if you're honest and you have integrity, at some point in time, you're going to understand that you did so and correct yourself. If not, well, you have to do all this over again, I guess, or something. No, I would encourage you to read the Gnostic Gospels. There's a lot of good information in there. It gives you, at the very least, it gives you insight into the thinking of that group of people back in the 2nd century AD, 1st and 2nd centuries AD. There is Hellenistic influence there. But there's also a lot of valid historical based information that historians use, theologians use. I don't buy them hook, line, and sinker. You know, the idea of Yahweh being the demiurge, the Yaldabaoth, I reject that totally because I look at the words. I look at the letters in the words, not just the words, and I look at what is presented. Men are usually the ones that twist and distort things and make it into something else so that they can prosper, plunder, steal, murder, claim to be something they're not. No, I would encourage you to read the Gnostic Gospels. That doesn't mean they're all 100% right, but I'm telling you right now, the New Testament isn't 100% right. Yeah, what is true and what is a psyop? Michael T. Yeah, well, the first thing out of the bag is who benefits. If they're trying to improve you, really not influence you, not try to make you make a decision that's not in your best interest, that's a psyop. If they're trying to help you out to make the best decision, and it's a judgment call, but that's how you tell by their fruits. That's exactly how you tell. Yeah, words have been changed. I showed that in Jeremiah 32, where the scribes changed the word God to Israel. It says sons of God. Actually, it says sons of our God in Deuteronomy 32 when they found it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it had been changed in our texts, even the Hebrew texts by the scribes and the rabbis, to the sons of Israel. Yeah, that's just one example. And I've given you these others tonight. Oh, they didn't know my name, Yahweh. And yet Abraham called on Yahweh. Well, which is it, right? And the machinations that the rabbis and the apologists go through to explain that away are just unbelievable. But it's like I said, you tell a lie, and then you have to tell another lie, and then you forget what lie you said, and that's exactly what the scribes did when they were redacting the Old Testament, and what happened when the New Testament was written as well. Yeah, I agree, Sarah Brown. As a matter of fact, I write to people like Pamela Geller and Ben Shapiro and Benjamin Netanyahu and the head rabbi of Israel, a lot of different, Glenn Beck, a lot of these people, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, all these people that want to support Israel and push this stuff. Thou shalt not kill is very specific. It doesn't, that's been twisted too, and I've explained what it means. Lo ratzak. It means you do not kill the innocent. You do not hurt the innocent. And then they try to get around it if they do understand that by saying, well, they're not innocent. Nobody's innocent. Then I told Pamela Geller, well, if none of the Palestinians are innocent because Hamas is there, then none of the Israelis are innocent from what Israel has done. Everything from the Nakba from 47 to the attack on the USS Liberty, to, I think his name is Pollard, who stole our nuclear secrets and gave them to the Israelis. So by Pamela Geller's reasoning, if she's going to say all Palestinians are Hamas, and I'm going to say, okay, Pamela Geller, they're not innocent, right? Okay, that means that Israelis aren't innocent for what their government has done either. So, go take care of business and eat the muzzle of that thing. Roosevelt says, cannot understand how so many people think it is okay to murder unarmed civilians and destroy their property. Look at Mike Johnson. Look at Biden. I mean, Biden's put up front that he's concerned about the Palestinian people, but he's really not. He could cut off everything from Israel right now. The real reason is that's a political thing. Biden said it for once. He said if there wasn't an Israel, we'd have to create one, and he wasn't kidding. That aircraft carrier that we consider there, the U.S. Navy saying they're a force for good. You caught me on that today, Roosevelt. I put it on X. U.S. Navy is not a force for good. The U.S. is not a force for good. And when you're told in your churches and in your synagogues that God said it's okay to kill your adversaries relentlessly, men, women, and children, it's easy to believe. It's the simple way out. You get paid, you get pats on the back, you get promotions, you get advancements, more money. To take a stand and say, no, that's wrong, like Abraham did, The story of Abraham parlaying with God, bargaining with God, saying, no, you don't want to do that. Let's save it for 10's sake. You think the Israeli government's going to do that today? You think the U.S. government's going to do that today? You think the Western Europeans won't? And the funny thing about that, Roosevelt, and you and I both know this, they're considered Amalek, destined for destruction by the very people that they're putting up on a pedestal as the chosen ones. Get out of the way. Prep, pray, stay out of the way. Yeah, it is a Stockholm syndrome of a nature of Michael T. Sr. It is. And we've been trained on it for at least 2,000 years. And actually, you know, there are other societies that have rejected this whole. I think most of you know that these people that we're talking about, you know, they complain that they've been victims of this and victims of that and thrown out of here and thrown out of there. Well, when you start finding out this kind of stuff, you start understanding why. That doesn't mean I'm going to mistreat them, but I'm going to tell them up front that I'm not going to accept their BS either. But now they want to make that illegal, right? That's a crime to even say that they're full of BS and that they're no different than the people that they claim they were victims of to begin with. They're just like them. They're just like those people. Now it's like they're trying to make that illegal. I don't even know if the courts will strike it down. I think they've got everybody scared, to death. I almost said the wrong word there. It seemed like the Sumer in Egypt. Yeah, emergency exit. That's what I'm saying. Archaeologists are now saying that it looks like Sumer in Egypt rose at about the same time, and that would make sense. I mean, even in the Bible story and the rise of consciousness that Julian Jaynes talks about, all those things were happening right around that time period, 4,000 BC to 1700 BC. And it makes sense. People spreading out, you've seen that experiment about the monkeys, right? The one monkey that goes down to the river and he finds a piece of fruit and sees that it's floating down the river and he eats it. Well, just that interconnection with his other fellow monkeys, there's some kind of a connection there, and all of a sudden, it's not just that they show how to do it, there's actually this connection of doing the same thing. The pyramids, there are all kinds of hypotheses, theories about that, but a lot of the pyramids showed up in weird places in the world at about the same time. It's like people had this download, and they all did it at the same time. And I forget what they call that phenomenon, but I think it's named after the monkeys that they first saw it in. I think some of you might know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's right. If you're against genocide, then you're pro-Hamas. That's not it at all. But that's how it's been fed to us, Roosevelt. You're absolutely right. The Creator is going to shake this world like no one has ever seen. Linda Spade. Well, I don't know what that timetable is. But if these idiots keep backing this horrible stuff, cause and effect, if nothing else, will take control. Oh, good, you did read it. Good, the Gnostics. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. That's good. Victoria Cunningham, right. Don't look at anything about Egypt. Remember, Egypt was bad. They put those poor Hebrews in slavery. They didn't tell you that they were Hebrews themselves, did they? The Hyksos were Semites, as I explained earlier today. That's who Joseph was sold into slavery to, the Hyksos. Akhenaten was a Hyksos. We know that. The Hyksos were shepherd kings. They were the Shemite, Hebrew and Arabic shepherd kings, both, primarily Hebraic. Yeah, a lot of you know what's going on, it looks like. And I haven't been as forthright and direct as I could be, and I think most of you know that. Well, I wouldn't go that far, Walter, but that's okay. Walter says,
God loves and eats pancakes, sausage, eggs, bacon, and coffee every morning. Well, as I've said, the Levitical laws are a lot of them are for control, and a lot of them are economic. Um, I think one of the reasons why certain things were prohibited from being eaten, I don't think God said that because that's contrary to what he said in other places. You know, when Noah came off the ark, supposedly God said, all creeping things you can eat, right? And then all of a sudden, when the Levitical law comes under, supposedly under Moses, now you can't eat this, you can't eat that, you can't do this, you can't do that. I think it was because if you eat shrimp or certain types of fish, you're not contributing to the economy of the shepherds and of the Israelite economy because they deal in lamb and fowl and scaled fish and stuff like that. So I think a lot of those things were in there for economic reasons. The death cult, the temple of death cult, wasn't so much about expiation of sins or the withholding of judgment. I don't think it was that at all. I think it was, we get that bullock there, we kill it. God gets the fat and the parts none of us want, and the priests separate the rest of it and put it and take it for themselves, their families, and probably to sell on the market or whatever. And a portion of it is given back to the person who brought the sacrifice. It's all economics. No killing of an animal. I don't care how they try to make it be like, a forerunner of what God was going to do with Jesus. I don't want to get into the Abrahamic thing tonight. Maybe I will at some other time. But the mere fact that Abraham even thought about sacrificing his son Isaac, which supposedly, he had come out of. Human sacrifice, especially the firstborn, that was a very early on belief, even amongst the Israelites. And I don't want to get into that tonight. That gets really, really nasty. Hey, your head's exploding. Well, and I know I throw out information here that goes against so much. King and Queen Ahmose and Hatshepsut. I never could say that name. Hatshepsut. Yeah. I'm not an expert in Egyptology. I'm not an archaeologist. But I've studied enough of it, as I've shown you tonight, that's not like we've been told. The Egyptian of the Ptolemaic period from the Rosetta Stone is not exactly, or probably not at all, like the Egyptian of, say, the First Dynasty or even the Middle Kingdom period. It just isn't. So, I think we've been sold a bill of goods on what Egypt was really about. Yeah, that's right. The term anti-Semite, the Jews try to use it just for themselves, but it would include the Arabs. It would include anybody that's from Noah's son Shem, which is certainly a lot more people than the Jews. I mean, the Akkadians, all the Aryans, the people in India, the Persians, all those people were Semites. Hezekiah's seal has an ankh on it. Now that I didn't know, but that wouldn't surprise me. I talked about that. In fact, I've got that here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Remember, I did a video on Enki, and Enki means I am in Sumerian. Enki means I am. Enki was the pre-runner to that whole concept, right, in the Sumerian culture. Again, along with the Egyptian. Here, I put this one up some time ago there. Enki is also the basis for the word Ankh. There it is right there. So yeah, there's no wonder that Hezekiah was wearing it. Yeah. Yeah, no wonder. Yeah, John Murphy says he read Thomas Paine's Age of Reason. The Bible is mind control. Oh yeah, religion means control. Religion means regulation. Um, the preachers, the priests, and all these people, if they want to teach what God does, they set the example. They don't sit up there and rule over you. If they believe God has your best interests at heart, which He does, then you're going to get what you receive. You don't need to have these people constantly telling you what to do, which is why, in the end, I rejected the Levitical law, all those mitzvot. I don't believe the 613 mitzvot at all. Shakespeare said as much. I don't need to go through the mitzvot to understand it. I can get as much moral lessons reading Shakespeare or Hemingway or Mark Twain as I can from Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and those Levitical law. It was all priest controlled. As I said, beware of the priests. Yeah, I think it is going to be a big awakening. Israel has really shown their true colors. The thing that I find, and I'm not sure why, the thing I find reprehensible is that the local countries over there are not reacting. You know, Egypt, Jordan, even Lebanon more than they are. Saudi Arabia, I didn't expect they would, because Saudis are really just cousins to the people that are running Israel. They're all Edomite Arabs, so including the people that run Israel. I could get into the Khazarian thing and all that, but I'm not going to, okay? But yeah, why they sit around and watch that, I think basically they're condemning themselves. I think they're condemning themselves, and so this is going to get ugly. When cause and effect, cause and effect, however you want to look at it, it's going to come down. And as I've said, at this point in time, when it does happen, the thing that happens now, the destruction of Jerusalem 70 AD is going to look like a picnic compared to what they're going to be facing now. And then everybody will say, oh, you know, the poor, you know, oh, they're God's chosen people, and God's going to come and judge the world for how they've treated it. They've really read the scriptures wrong. Even the Jewish prophets knew how bad it was. I mean, you had people like Samuel that screwed things up royally, but some of the others understood. Hosea, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah. It wasn't just that the people were out of control, it was that there was a problem with what they do. Okay, we've been going for an hour and a half. I think maybe I'll shut it down here for now. I hope this was of some interest to you. It may not have gone to where some of you wanted it to go, but I wanted to keep it in the realms of what we could talk about historically, and these connections with Egypt and how important Egypt was. I mean, from what we can find out, even the New Testament says that Jesus probably went into Egypt for some period of time. In my book, The Crimson Thread, with the research I did, and I don't think Jesus was a Jew. I think I've made that very clear. He was probably a Samaritan, but regardless, he apparently went to, whoever he was, he went to On in Egypt, which means city of the sun in Egyptian, which is Heliopolis in Greek, which is Beth Shemesh in Hebrew. And he was taught some things there. And Egyptian, the idea of the resurrection, and the feather in the heart, weighing the feather in the heart, doing unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And of course, that came from Hillel, the rabbi, too. But it's all through. There are those two paths again that I'm talking about. On was a nasty place at that time in the first century. Nasty place. It had great stuff and it had debauchery. It had both. So right there, you were confronted with the two paths. You could either take the righteous path or you could take the wrong path. I'll just put it that way. and it was right there known. And apparently Jesus, the person who knows Jesus, was there for a time and was able to be confronted with that. I had a friend once that described Jesus as being a man that was confronted with more conflicts than any other human being and was able to navigate his way through them. And I personally don't think, my son Jeremy doesn't want me to say this, but I don't consider that person, that Jesus character, or Joseph, as I think that his name was. I don't think that that he was God incarnate. I think that he was, and I'm not saying he was an adept like the Eastern masters or anything like that. I'm saying that he was a guy that ordered his life in such a way that he was able to realize the benefits of his true spiritual search for himself, with the help of God, of course, because we're all in the same family. That was the other secret of this, which is why saying you're chosen people and everybody else are beasts of the field and animals and scum of the earth and deserve death and kill all their women and children and all this stuff. That's not what that name means. That name means that we're all part of the same family, which is the way I've put it for a long time. All right. I guess we're done. Thanks for coming, everybody. Keep your eyes on the horizon, ears to the ground. Things are going to get nasty this summer. I think you can already see that. I agree with the stand of many of the people that are demonstrating around the world against the thing that's happening there in Israel and Palestine and in other places. The problem is that when you have those things happen, you do get infiltrated by provocateurs, people that are paid by Soros, people that are paid by the State Department, people that are paid by Rothschild, whoever, right? The NWO, Klaus Schwab, whoever, to get their fingers in there to again distort the goodness that's there, to turn it into something evil. That's what they do. And so a lot of these demonstrations where there are bad things happening, assaults, destruction of property, things like that's because of this influence. But the initial demonstrations against the atrocities that are occurring, those are justified. It's just when you interfere with somebody else's liberty, even in demonstrating against something like this, blocking a road. I'm even against that, because you're in the name of liberty, you're blocking somebody else's liberty. That doesn't make any sense to me. So you have to do it in a way where you're not interfering with other people. Now, there can be arguments made that at some point that becomes a necessity, as Patrick Henry said, or Thomas Jefferson rather. The tree of liberty has to be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots from time to time. But that's something that's so we got to stay away from that as much as we can. So anyway, I understand what they're doing, but they are being infiltrated. When we were at Bundy Ranch, they tried to infiltrate us, but we had a very good security system put into place where we identified those people and we threw them away. We threw them out. We told them to leave. And if these organizations don't self-police, then things get out of hand. You may remember, some of you may have followed me back then, there was a couple, a man and a woman, that came in and we identified them as being this provocateur group, maybe just real criminals in this case. And there were some other situations too, which I won't discuss, but these two, we threw them out, and they went downtown Las Vegas and shot up a Walmart, and then ended up getting, they were shot, and then they committed suicide. I think the woman shot the man shot the woman at the same time. They were bad folks. But you have to, if you're going to have these organizations, if you're going to organize and demonstrate, which is your right, redress of grievances to the government, right of assembly and freedom of speech, if you're going to do that, you got to also understand that you have to provide some type of internal security to watch for these infiltrators and deal with it, which can be a problem in and of itself. The January 6th is a good example of that not being done. And this surprised me. And this is why I'm so disgusted with Trump and with General Flynn and with Alex Jones, all those people. You can't do something like that and not prep for infiltration of people that are going to try to to turn your righteous actions into mayhem. For crying out loud, General Michael Flynn, for being the top intelligence officer, and I don't mean to badmouth the guy, but I've got a lot of questions about him. He goes in and talks to the FBI, knowing what he knew about the deep state trying to come after Trump, and he goes in there and he does that without counsel present? Come on. And he's our top spook? And then they go to that January 6th thing, same thing, no internal security. What? I'm just very suspicious of those types of things. All right. Again, keep your eyes on the horizon, your ears to the ground. Situational awareness on high. Prep, pray, stay out of the way. All right. You can defend yourselves, but don't get in. Don't. You see a demonstration going on? At this point, best just not to get involved. Go to your congressman's office. Go to, and they're not going to listen to you either. I've got to go to his office, Senator Mike Lee. I've basically just been, hitting him on X and other ways, but they don't want to answer me. But then again, I'm kind of a notorious character, as most of you know. Most people don't have any respect for my viewpoints because I'm so different. I'm not a traditional this or a traditional that. I believe in this stuff. I believe in the male, female, and other deeper meanings of the tetragrammaton, the YHVH. And they don't like that. All right. Y'all take care. Out of here until next time.